Okay, awesome, AP Bio 2 kids. We're ready to record another lesson. This is going to be kind of a short one. I basically want to finish where we left off on Friday with variation and natural selection. So see if you can find the slide among yours that you have, and we'll go ahead and get started. Okay, so talking about variation, genetic variation. It doesn't take much for you to look out into a crowd and find your friends, because we all exhibit a lot of differences among us, and you pretty much know what your friends look like, and even if it's a large crowd, you're going to be able to find your friends because we all exhibit genetic variation. So the definition of genetic variation are the differences among individuals in the composition of their genes or other DNA. So it's kind of like it's the substrate for evolution, which means it's going to be what's acted upon in evolution. Evolution is acting on genetic variation. So it's going to be maintained through several things. One is polymorphism, okay, and you can see over here with the butterflies, it's one of my favorite things, the monarch butterfly and the viceroy butterfly. So it's called polymorphism because it's the coexistence of two or more distinct forms of individuals in the same population. So they must occupy the same habitat at the same time in a randomly mating population. So one of these is the monarch and one is the viceroy. And you know, when predators are trying to eat these, they can commonly be mistaken for each other because they have a lot of similarities. But that's one example of genetic variation in a population. So it's distinct forms or morphs, that's a vocabulary term, that can exist in a population. Okay, another way that genetic variation is maintained is through geographical variation. And I'll show you this diagram down here. It's differences in genetic structure between separate populations. An example is a cline. You probably read about this. A cline is a graded change in a character along a geographic axis. It can be produced by a gradation in an environmental variable. For example, in this diagram, okay, the environmental variable is altitude. Okay, so you can see that this is a population of yarrow plants, and they're looking at the height of the yarrow plants. So in the Sierra Nevada range, okay, you can see the height of the plant ranges up, and this is centimeters, to about 75 centimeters at its tallest, but then as the altitude is changing and you get up to the highest point of altitude, which is over 3,000, it's more like 3,500 meters, then you see the shortest type of plant. So the environmental factor is altitude is changing the height at which these plants are growing. So it can be, you can have something in the environment impact the frequency of an allele, and in this case the allele is for plant height. So that's an example of a cline. All right, let's switch here. My Mobi is acting up, so bear with me because I'm working with a Mobi that is giving me a lot of trouble. So I'm going to try to do the best I can. I have like a blank area here. Okay, so variation is also maintained through mutation. I mean, think about this. If you've got a gene mutation or even a chromosome mutation, you know, whether you're changing just one gene or the whole chromosome is mutated, then that's going to maintain variation within populations. Recombination is just a simple crossing over in meiosis, okay, and that's going to occur all the time whenever organisms are making their gametes through the process of meiosis. The more crossing over that occurs, the more recombination in turn creates the more genetic variation in a population. So that's another way that variation is maintained. The fact that organisms are diploid, okay, maintain diploidy, that's also going to you know, keep variation within populations. So in all eukaryotes, they are diploid, and we talked about how prokaryotic organisms are haploid because they only have one chromosome, but the second set of chromosomes enables some alleles to be hidden in a heterozygote form. So that's another way of, you know, kind of having variation, because the more heterozygous individuals you have, let's say you have, and my Mobi is acting up right now, so I'm going to have to go over here to write on it. So the more heterozygous individuals you have, you're hiding one of these alleles, which creates more variation, because if these two people, or whatever it may be, these two organisms decide to mate, there's a chance that you're going to have the homozygous recessive phenotype arise, which is genetically varied compared to both of these parents. So diploidy also creates variation for populations as well. Okay, another example is balanced polymorphism. We talked about this on Friday, but I just want to make sure that you have this in your notes. Heterozygote advantage, with the example of sickle cell anemia. We talked about how when heterozygous individuals, this is considered to be an advantage if heterozygous individuals have greater fitness. So if you are heterozygous for sickle cell anemia, you have what's called sickle cell trait, you have an advantage because you are resistant to malaria. Okay, so that's defined in genotype, not phenotype, and they're protected from malaria if they live in Africa. Okay, this example down here is still underneath balanced polymorphism, but it's called frequency-dependent selection. I thought this was so cool. I hope you read about this in the book because it's a really cool instance. But it's the fitness of a phenotype depends on how common it is in the population. One example that the book was talking about is there are certain scale-eating fish. It's fish that prey upon other fish, but what they do is they follow behind a fish and they eat the scales off the side of their body. Well, some of these scale-eating fish are left-mouthed. Can you imagine, like the mouth is to the left, and some are right-mouthed. So the right-mouth allele is dominant. Okay, so if you're right-mouthed, I mean, you have to actually do this with your mouth. It's kind of funny, but if you are a right-mouthed fish, you're preying on the left side of the fish. Okay, if this is your fish right here that you're preying upon, here's a little fish, and this is you. If you're right-mouthed, your mouth is this way, you're going to be preying upon the left side of the fish, so you're going to be eating the scales off this side. Okay, well what that does is the prey species, this fish, starts to guard itself against whichever phenotype, whether it's the right-mouthed or the left-mouthed fish, is most common. And so this selection can then have an impact on the frequency of the right-mouthed or the left-mouthed allele in the population of the predator fish. So it's kind of cool that the survival and reproduction of any one morph can decline if it becomes too common. So depending on which one is, the most common mouthed fish is going to be what those poor little prey fish are going to select against that allele. Okay, so it's kind of cool when you look at that. Okay, we covered this one. I don't think I need to go over this too much, but it's talking about how natural selection it's dynamic, which means as an organism's environment changes, their adaptations may also need to change. So what constitutes a good match between an organism and their environment can be a moving target. So the frequency of the allele can be an advantage at one point and then not another, so it may have to constantly be changing. And so you can see how in this diagram the genetic effects have an impact on phenotype, which may have an impact on fitness, but then you also have environmental effects having an impact on both of those as well. So natural selection is a dynamic process. Okay, a closer look at natural selection. It's the only evolutionary mechanism for adaptive evolution. So this example in this little graph is also what we had talked about earlier, decline, how the frequency of a certain allele, which helps them have a metabolic benefit, it's going to be present during whichever climate is best suited for it. So in mimicry fish, which is this one, the frequency of the allele for a certain enzyme that functions in metabolism decreases in fish sampled from Maine to Georgia. The allele codes for a form of the enzyme that is a better catalyst in cold water than other versions of the enzyme. So individuals with that LDHB allele can swim faster in cold water than individuals with other alleles. Okay, hold on one sec. Okay, so adaptive evolution is when organisms are more adapted for a certain, certain trait in the environment. Those are the ones that are going to survive and pass the traits on to their offspring. So you can see the snake down here, and I know you guys know all about the fact that they have hingeless jaws, which is why they can open their mouths so wide. So such adaptations can arise gradually over time as natural selection increases the frequencies of alleles that enhance their survival and reproduction. And as the proportion of individuals that have favorable traits increase, the match between that species, in this case the snake, and its environment that needs to have food at a certain size is going to occur. So the hingeless jaws, the bones being movable, having this extra ability to open the mouth that wide is an adaptation. And so if you have it, you survive. If you don't have it, then you may struggle, and therefore natural selection, survival of the fittest, is the mechanism for which this adaptive evolution occurs. Now, two things that can have an impact on this, though, on adaptive evolution, are genetic drift and gene flow. You can imagine genetic drift and gene flow increase the frequency of alleles that improve the match, but neither does so consistently. So genetic drift can cause allele frequency to increase or decrease. Gene flow may introduce alleles that are disadvantageous. So those can have an impact on this as well. Okay, so we covered this. I'm going to skip this. We already did that in class. Okay, Charles Darwin was the first to explore the implications of sexual selection which is a form of selection in which individuals with certain inherited characteristics are more likely than others to obtain mates. Okay, so it can result in, you can see here, sexual dimorphism. It's a difference between two sexes and secondary sex characteristics. These distinctions include differences in size, color, ornamentation, and behavior. Okay, so certain examples, intrasexual selection, okay, intra, within the same sex, it's where individuals of one sex compete directly for mates of the opposite sex. You've probably seen this, it happens a lot with ducks, your mallard ducks, especially here in Kingwood and Lake Conroe, Lake Livingston. The male mallard duck will patrol, it's like a patrolling male, so he'll like patrol in front of a bunch of the females, but he's patrolling keeping all of the other males away from the population. Now he doesn't want to do it to the point that he causes harm, because then he's jeopardizing his own fitness. You know, they want to make sure that the population continues, so he's not going to harm the males. He's just going to do his thing where he's, you know, trying to show the others and more for like, kind of like a, you know, haha, this is me, I'm the biggest, I'm the baddest, I'm patrolling in front of these females, trying to win over a mate. But like I said, he's kind of defending his status from the smaller, weaker males. But it's more of a psychological victor, you know, it's like a victory in that realm. So that's different than interselection. This is individuals of one sex are choosy in selecting their mate. This is male chauvinist. Like in peacocks, they have this, several other bird types as well. So the female is looking on she's depending on the male chauvinist before she selects her mate. So that's intersexual versus intrasexual. So a little bit different there. And that is it for this one. My next recording will have macroevolution.